Well, thank you very much for coming and taking some time out of your day when you could be outside enjoying this wonderful weather. It's hard for me to follow in the footsteps of both Jan Sisler and Marion Claffey, and Marion wanted to be here today, but she had another meeting, both of whom told wonderful stories in this series, and maybe some of you have heard those. And even though I've been here over 25 years, given I don't know how many talks, I've said to a couple of people, it's kind of hard to talk about yourself and be personal. But that's what I was asked to do, and so that's what I'll do. And I've also spent some time, and Jan and I chatted about this, and I'm older than Jan, and I'm older than Marion, so I'm thinking, which story, if you're going to tell her story, which story of these many years? And so I thought what I would do is actually tell 3 stories with a little bit of stuff around each story that really taught me something very important about myself and that I thought might be worth sharing with the rest of you. So the first is how I came to study theology and become a theologian. I did not grow up thinking, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to become a theologian. It's a little, that in fact really wasn't an option for me in the 50s and 60s. I'm the third of 6 children in an Irish Catholic suburban baby boom family. I grew up near Detroit. And I grew up always feeling a little bit different than my siblings, whom I love. My older brother joked with me that I was adopted. And in return, I had this fantasy that my real parents were really these glamorous and artistic, this couple who lived in New York and Paris and London, but who gave me to this family with whom I had this incredible physical resemblance so that I could grow up like a normal person. So that was part of my fantasy. But I also grew up in another way knowing that I wanted to lead a different life than I saw around me. In a suburban family in the 50s and 60s, mothers didn't work. It just seemed to me to be a kind of a constricted and constrained existence. And I looked at the nuns that I had at school and I thought they had a little more interesting existence because they probably didn't have to do the laundry and all the cooking and all of that, but there were a few limitations in their lives too. And so I knew that I wanted to do something different, and I went through various ideas when I was growing up, and kind of drifted for a while. I did have wonderful, wonderful teachers, the Religious of the Sacred Heart in high school and college, and as Bren was very kindly noted, I actually started out college as a music major, and my plan was to go on and become a great pianist. But if any of you has ever studied music and then gone on and seen how really good people who are really, really good can play the piano, I realized kind of early on in my college career that it was not, if I was going to go to Carnegie Hall, I was going to have to buy a ticket. So I became a religion major, and that religion course was this really interesting course that was actually in Old Testament, and I decided that I couldn't get a Bachelor of Music degree, which meant practically all my courses were in music. I had a few liberal arts courses. So I switched back to a BA, and I was looking for an interesting course to take, and I took a course in the religion department, as it was called at my college, and I loved it, but I didn't know what you did with that. And so I graduated, and I really didn't know what I was going to do, so I ended up sort of finding my way to this job for an investment banking firm. And I worked for this bank and then an investment banking firm for about 3 years. So this is the background. So one day, about 2 years after I graduated, and when I was working in New York, and by that time I'd become a registered stockbroker, I was learning about investment analysis, I got a call from one of the teachers at my college. And the amazing thing is that, first of all, she was probably the most famous professor at the college. Her name is Mary T. Clark, and she is this famous Augustine scholar. I had never taken a course with her, but it was a small enough college that I'd gotten to know her. And she called me up, and she said, Susan, are you thinking of going to graduate school in theology? And it was like, bing. I thought, well, yeah, maybe. But I mean, I didn't know how one really did this. And so what was really interesting for me, you know, it was sort of a dream for me. But my mother, who eventually did go to work, and she worked as a secretary. My father was an advertising salesman. What did I know about graduate school and theology? Nothing. And so this Sister Clark guided me through the whole process. And she read my essays, she corrected my essays, she suggested things that I might do, and I still remember that phone call. It was such a turning point for me that this teacher, who wasn't even my teacher, but she was, you know, a member of the faculty there, and I had been involved in student government, and so I knew her, that she was the one that said, I think that Susan Ross ought to think about going to graduate school. And so it was amazing. So I did. I applied to Harvard and Chicago. I was kind of optimistic then. And I actually got accepted at both, and I ended up coming to Chicago for a number of complicated reasons. But the thing is that I don't know how quickly I would have done that had it not been for her paying attention to me, finding something in me that she thought was worth nurturing, and really, really helping me along the way. And when I got to Chicago, I thought, my real family really lives here. You know, it was one of those things that, even though it was a very difficult experience, going to graduate school, 5 years of very hard work, I really did feel at home. And so I really still marvel and am filled with such gratitude for her encouragement. And in fact, she just turned 97 a couple of weeks ago. And it has made me realize how important that kind of encouragement can be. So she saw something in me that she nurtured, and it made such an incredible difference in my life. And it reminds me of how much impact we can have on someone's life when we may not have a sort of obvious reason, you know, to connect with them. And so I like to think of that as something that I can pass along to encourage people, and that all of us, and especially the students here, don't think that your teachers don't notice you. Don't think that people just think of you as another person in their class, because we impact each other. Now the second story. The second story is also a story of mentoring and nurturing. Fast forward 5 years. My first job was at St. Norbert College in De Pere, Wisconsin. I should note that until I moved to De Pere, which is a suburb of Green Bay, I had never lived in a metropolitan area of less than 3 million people. Brown County, in which St. Norbert is located, has about 125,000. So it was quite an adjustment, because I'm quite a city girl. And in fact, I hadn't had a lot of teaching experience before I went to St. Norbert. Back in those days, especially at the University of Chicago, you know, they would just assume that you were this brilliant scholar and you would just go on and, you know, share your scholarship with people. And the idea of actual learning pedagogy was, well, I learned it the hard way. I made all the mistakes, plus more, that any typical first-year teacher makes. The biggest mistake was assuming that my students were just like me, you know, interested, hardworking, studious. And, you know, when I went into my 2 sections of Introduction to the Christian Life with 40 students in them, most of them sitting there like this, with my 10 pages of notes, which I got through. That's the worst part about that story. It was a very, very hard semester. And the worst was yet to come, because when I got my teaching evaluations back at the end of the semester, they were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. I was in the 10th percentile. I was devastated. I just thought, maybe I've made a huge mistake. Maybe I can't do that. I had a colleague, a young guy who had started out with me, and he was in the modern language department, and he was in the 20th percentile. So he wasn't so great, but at least he was better. And so that was pretty tough. But I had this incredible department chair who said, we got to talk. And I'm thinking, okay, this is it. There goes my job. You know, I don't know if I can really do this. And he sat me down and I said, he said, you know, let's talk about this. And what happened is that once a week, almost once a week, that whole semester, we met and we talked about the classes. He talked about his classes. I talked about mine. And he wasn't there to sort of say, this is what you should do, I'm your boss. But it was really, these are the challenges that teachers run into all the time. This is how I've dealt with it. You know, maybe you can think of ways that you might deal with it. And he was so incredibly supportive and encouraging, because I remember him saying to me, I know that inside you is a wonderful teacher, but we just have to help that teacher come out. So that just was wonderful. He taught me all of these things, and I wrote some of these down. What students are like, you know, and the fact that students who come into required theology courses may at first come in sort of like, oh God, here I am, I have to take this course. But actually deep down inside, those students really do care. They are deeply, deeply curious. They really want to know something about the meaning of life. They're just kind of bored with business as usual. And so my job was really to try and make this as compelling as I really think it is. I sometimes call this my seduction theory of teaching with undergraduates. So that you really have to sort of bring them in, and then all of a sudden they think, oh, this is theology, it's not so bad. So the thing, though, that I think he really gave to me the most was the best teacher that any person can be is themselves. And that is something that any of you thinking of doing teaching or whatever should learn, because not all of us are the same. And in fact, 3 or 4 years into my experience here, which was actually after I'd been teaching 5 years elsewhere, I was evaluated by a senior faculty member in my department. And only those of you who've been here a very long time will understand this, but I'll explain it. And so I thought the class went very well. And so he wrote up his evaluation, and this we do for all the pre-tenure faculty. And he wrote, well, you know, you're no John Powell. Well, John Powell was this very charismatic Jesuit who taught a lot of students here. And no, I wasn't John Powell. And he was meaning it in a critical sort of way. But fortunately, by that time, with the help of my colleague from St. Norbert, I could sort of say, well, you know, that's your vision of how a teacher ought to be. I'm who I am. So I had wonderful experiences with my students at St. Norbert. And if any of you saw that little video I did about a year or so ago about teaching, that story actually was about a situation at St. Norbert where I got to the end of a semester and we all sat there and my students said, I don't want this to be over. And for me, it was just what a gift that they gave me. So in my 3rd year at St. Norbert, I applied for a job in Pittsburgh, big city. And when I went for the interview, I found out that there was a vacancy because the faculty member there was a disaster in the classroom in his first semester. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, that could be me. But I had a different chair. And so I realized how easily I could have been fired at St. Norbert. And because someone saw potential in me, that I wasn't fired, and that with support and encouragement and a little bit more attention to the basics of teaching, you know, I could become a good teacher. And so, again, another person who really, really was very important in my own development. Okay, my 3rd story. This is a little more personal than professional, but I thought, well, okay, I'll go out a little bit on a limb with this. Now, when I was growing up, I had 3 sisters, and two of them did stints at modeling. And I was convinced that they were beautiful and I was not. And I was always the nerdy one. And actually, if you see pictures of me from 8th grade, high school, you know, you would understand that. I had glasses, frizzy hair, and in fact, I had to be fixed up. You know, I don't know if that term still means anything. I had to be fixed up for the senior prom. You know, somebody had a friend, and they say, would you go with her? Oh, okay. So, so I went to an all-girls high school. I went to an all-women's college, and I didn't really date much. And I went out with a few people when I was working in New York, but it was nothing terribly serious. But when I was 25, I went to the University of Chicago, and as I said, I felt like I had kind of come home. And I did begin to go out with people that I found interesting, and they did for me. But in all that time, to be honest, I always felt that the dating game, and this may be for some of the older ones of us here, we were told when we were in our teens, for the girls, you have to be interested in the boys. You know, it's not like the boys should be interested in you. You have to be interested in the boys. And my mother would say to me, talk to them about football. And I think, I don't want to talk about football. But there was always this kind of underlying theme for me, particularly in my teens and in my early 20s. You know, you're too smart for boys. Boys are not going to like you. And I kind of internalized that. And I thought, well, the hell with them. You know, and so I had a pretty good time. But then I did develop some relationships. And over the 10 years or so, in graduate school, in my first 5 years of teaching, I fell in and out of love a couple of times. And I mean, it was a great experience and sometimes not a great experience. And in my late 30s, I was involved in one relationship that did not turn out very well. It was really extremely painful, in part because I was trying to change for him. And it took me a while after that broke up to sort of realize the problem with that. So when I turned 40, I threw myself a party. And it was the party to end the search. And it was to be a celebration. My life was fine. Who needed someone else to make them complete? Not me. And I remember joking with my friends, well, maybe I should get cats, you know. And in fact, I had bought a condo, and this is in 1986 when I had bought my condo. It actually said that I was a spinster. It did. That was the legal language. Now, I think that changed, but it did. Susan A. Ross, a spinster, was buying this condo, and I just, well, they've since changed the language. So, okay, so a few months later, school began, and I had heard of this person who had been hired in a non-tenure track position in the theology department, and he had been in the Jesuits. Well, that wasn't so hot because I was done with dating. I was done dating, especially divorced men. And if someone had been married to the church or to God, I mean, that was even more. So, and he was reasonably nice. But so we came to know each other as friends, and I don't know about this. And well, then we got to be better friends, and well, then we started dating. And then one day, he said to me, and I can still see where I was in my office in Crown, that someone he had sort of gone out with, we talked about this the other day, and said, I wasn't really dating her, but someone he had gone out with once or twice had asked him to do a favor for her. And he later on told me that she was trying to use him to get someone else. So he said, you know, this person has asked me to do a favor for her. Would you mind if I did it? And, you know, I remember thinking, you know, the me of 5 years ago would have said, oh, how can you do this? You know, I thought you liked me, and now, you know, and I would have been very insecure about it. But I remember thinking to myself, if I really meant what I said at my 40th birthday party, which I did, that I didn't need another person, I didn't need a man, in this case, to make me a whole person, that I had to allow both of us the freedom to be ourselves and not to feel threatened by this. So I told him, you know, Bill, you should do what you want to do. If you want to do this, go do it. If you don't want to do it, whatever. It's your decision. That's fine. And to be honest, I don't know whether he did this favor, which is like picking her up at the airport and, you know, sort of driving her around. But it was a turning point for me and for us, where I think we both realized that in order for us to have a really good relationship, we needed to give the other person the freedom to make their own decisions. So anyway, to cut to the chase, so to speak, a couple of weeks ago we celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary. So, but that decision to allow him freedom was really crucial, really more, I think, for me than for him. It meant, at least for me, that we came together not out of need, but out of freedom. And as a result, I came to see that it isn't just me in our relationship, but really both of us in our career decisions. And in fact, he made a career decision at one point. He turned down a tenure track job to stay in Chicago with me, and he had, at that point, no job. So it meant that we came together, as I said, not out of need, but of freedom. And so our career decisions then are really decisions for both of us. So once we both, I think, freely made these decisions to commit to each other, it really meant that the most important thing for both of us was not career success. And I have to say, I've had much more than I ever thought I would. But it also meant that the most important thing was our partnership together. And that, I think that commitment, in a sense, ironically, then frees us to do, both of us, what we want to do in life. And then, I mean, we sort of have this nice happy ending. He eventually did, after a couple of really, really tough years, he did get a tenure-track job. So we now, it's great. We're both tenured professors in the same city. But this interesting commitment of freedom and interesting combination, I should say, of freedom and commitment, I think, is what I've learned from that. So those are my three stories. They have taught me a couple of lessons that I try to remember and I hope might be worth something to those of you here. The one is that we are all, in one way or another, nurtured into our selfhood. This is something that feminist thinkers in particular really emphasize. We are not simply born as rational men, but we rather grow into who we are through our parents, through our friends, through our communities. Most of us are not like Horatio Alger. We don't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps or as rugged individuals, but we come to maturity in a community with people who have reached out to us and we to them. And I owe, obviously, a great deal to those who had confidence in me at times when I didn't have that much confidence in myself. And the second lesson that I learned is that even in this communal kind of coming to selfhood, our own freedom is really important. For women of my generation, this was a tough lesson to learn. And I think that my mother, who thought everything I did was wonderful, I was very fortunate, how important this really is. And as I said, I was told many times when I was younger that, oh, you're too smart, you'll never find a man. And in fact, after my father died, my mother remarried, my stepfather kept saying that, oh, Susie, you're just way too smart, you're never gonna find a man. And I just fortunately didn't listen to him. But I think one of the great contributions of the women's movement has been the encouragement of women to be ourselves, to be who we are, and not just who others want us to be. And especially to the young women here, I would just want to say, always keep that in mind in all of your relationships. And the most wonderful relationships are the ones that nurture you as you are, and in which the other loves you as you are, not who they want you to be. So I would encourage all of us here to think of the people who have helped us to get where we want to go, and perhaps helped us see even things in us that we might not have seen ourselves. And I also would say that the best way to be in a relationship is to be in a relationship freely. And these are lessons that I keep needing to learn over and over, and I hope you find them helpful for yourselves as well. So thanks for listening.